My name is Margaret Chen, and this is the story of how my 28-year-old son learned that disrespecting the woman who raised him would cost him everything he thought he was entitled to. The morning he looked me dead in the eye and told me I was just rotting away in my own home. Something inside me crystallized into steel. He had no idea that within hours I would set in motion a plan that would leave him scrambling to understand how his comfortable, consequence-free life had vanished overnight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That moment of pure cruelty wasn't just an insult, it was the final straw that broke a mother's patience after years of watching her son transform from a sweet child into an entitled adult who saw my home as his personal hotel and my bank account as his emergency fund. What Kevin didn't know as he smirked at me that Tuesday morning was that I had already begun documenting every cruel word, every unpaid bill, every broken promise, and by the time he realized what was happening, the for sale sign would already be planted in our front yard. The foundation of this disaster was built over years of small compromises that slowly eroded into major capitulations. When my husband Tom passed away from a sudden heart attack 3 years ago, our world shifted dramatically. Kevin had been living independently then, working at an electronics store in downtown Riverside, and dating a nice girl named Sarah. He seemed to be finding his footing as an adult, even if he wasn't exactly thriving. The first crack appeared 6 months after Tom's funeral. Kevin showed up at my door on Oakwood Drive with 2 suitcases and a story about his lease falling through. His roommate had apparently bailed without notice, leaving him unable to cover the rent alone. As any mother would, I welcomed him home with open arms, assuming it would be temporary, maybe a month or 2 while he sorted out his living situation and found a new place. That was 2.5 years ago. What started as a brief stay gradually morphed into permanent residence, but not the kind where he contributed to household expenses or helped maintain the property. Instead, Kevin settled into a pattern that would have driven Tom to distraction. He slept until noon most days, leaving his dirty dishes in the sink for me to clean, his laundry scattered across the bathroom floor, and his friends coming and going at all hours without so much as a courtesy text. The Riverside house that Tom and I had lovingly maintained became Kevin's personal crash pad. The 3-bedroom ranch on Oakwood Drive with its pristine hardwood floors and carefully tended garden slowly began showing signs of neglect that weren't from age but from carelessness. Mysterious stains appeared on the carpet. The guest bathroom, which Kevin had claimed as his own, developed a perpetual funk that no amount of cleaning seemed to eliminate. My beautiful kitchen island, where Tom and I used to share morning coffee and plan our days, became Kevin's gaming station, cluttered with energy drink cans and takeout containers. I told myself he was grieving too. Losing his father had hit him hard, and perhaps this regression was his way of processing the loss. I made excuses when he lost his job at the electronics store, citing conflicts with management and unreasonable scheduling demands. I nodded sympathetically when he explained that the job market was brutal and employers didn't appreciate his skills. I even found myself defending him to my best friend Linda Rodriguez when she gently suggested that maybe Kevin needed some tough love to motivate his independence. Linda had been my anchor through Tom's illness and death, the kind of friend who shows up with casseroles and tissues without being asked. She was also a successful real estate agent who had helped Tom and me purchase our home 15 years earlier. Her observations about Kevin weren't born from malice, but from genuine concern for my well-being. She had watched him transform from a polite teenager who mowed our lawn without being asked into an adult who couldn't be bothered to take out the trash when it was overflowing. The financial drain started subtly. Kevin would ask for $20 for gas, promising to pay me back when his unemployment check arrived. Then it became $50 for groceries that somehow never materialized in our refrigerator. Soon I was covering his car insurance because he couldn't afford the monthly payment, then his cell phone bill because staying connected was essential for job hunt. Each request came with a sob story and a promise that this would be the last time, that he was just waiting for the right opportunity to come along. My teacher's pension covered my modest needs comfortably, and the house was paid off thanks to Tom's life insurance. But Kevin's mounting expenses were beginning to strain my budget in ways I hadn't anticipated. The grocery bill doubled to accommodate his preferences for expensive energy drinks and premium frozen meat. The utility bills skyrocketed from his habit of leaving every light on and running his gaming setup around the clock. My peaceful retirement budget was slowly being consumed by an adult child who seemed oblivious to the financial impact of his choices. The disrespect escalated gradually, so incrementally that I almost didn't notice the shift until it became impossible to ignore. What began as occasional eye rolls when I suggested he apply for jobs became outright dismissal of my concern. My gentle reminders about household responsibilities were met with sighs and promises that never materialized into action. When I asked him to be more considerate about noise levels during his late-night gaming sessions, he accused me of being unreasonable and controlling. The girlfriend situation added another layer of complexity to an already strained dynamic. Ashley Thompson was a perfectly nice young woman in her mid-20s who worked part-time at a local boutique. The problem wasn't Ashley herself, but rather how Kevin's relationship with her highlighted his complete dependence on me. Their dates were funded by money he borrowed from me. When they wanted to go to concerts or movies, Kevin would casually mention needing $40 or $60, always with the same promise to repay me that never quite materialized. Ashley seemed uncomfortable with the arrangement, often offering to pay for their outings herself, but Kevin would insist with wounded pride that he could handle it. What he really meant was that his mother could handle it, though he carefully avoided stating that directly in front of his girlfriend. I found myself becoming an unwitting enabler of his false independence, subsidizing a lifestyle that allowed him to appear self-sufficient to Ashley, while remaining completely dependent on me. The breaking point had been building for months before it actually arrived. Kevin's job search had become increasingly half-hearted, consisting mainly of online applications submitted from his bedroom and the occasional interview that somehow never resulted in employment. His explanations for these failures always placed blame elsewhere. The interviewer was biased, the position wasn't a good fit, the salary was insulting for someone with his experience. The possibility that he might need to adjust his expectations or improve his interview skills never seemed to cross his mind. My attempts to have serious conversations about his future were consistently deflected or dismissed. When I suggested he might consider community college courses to develop new skills, he explained that he was too old to go back to school. When I mentioned opportunities in trades or service industries, he claimed those jobs were beneath his skill level. When I offered to help him create a budget to move out, he accused me of trying to get rid of him during a difficult time in his life. The morning that changed everything started like dozens of others that spring. I was in the kitchen at 7, enjoying my first cup of coffee and reading the local newspaper when Kevin stumbled in wearing wrinkled pajama pants and a gaming tournament t-shirt he'd been wearing for 3 days. His hair was greasy, his eyes bloodshot from another late night of online gaming, and he moved with the sluggish irritation of someone forced to be awake before noon. He opened the refrigerator and stood there for a full minute, letting the cold air escape while he surveyed the contents with the expression of someone personally offended by the available option. Finally, he grabbed the last container of yogurt, the expensive Greek kind I'd bought for my own breakfast, and a bottle of orange juice, consuming both while standing at the counter and scrolling through his phone. I watched this morning routine with growing irritation, particularly when he left both empty containers on the counter rather than disposing of them. This wasn't unusual behavior for Kevin, but something about the casual entitlement of it struck me differently that morning. Perhaps it was the way he completely ignored my presence, treating me like part of the furniture rather than the person who had provided him with free room and board for over 2 years. "Kevin," I said, keeping my voice level and pleasant, "when you're finished, could you please rinse those containers and put them in the recycling bin?" He looked up from his phone with an expression of genuine annoyance, as if I had interrupted something critically important. "I'm about to hop in the shower, Mom. Can't you just handle it?" The casualness of his dismissal hit me like a slap. Here was a 28-year-old man who hadn't contributed a single dollar to household expenses in months, asking his 62-year-old mother to clean up after his breakfast, like he was still a child. But I swallowed my immediate response and tried a different approach. "Actually, I was hoping we could talk about your job search progress. It's been almost 9 months since you lost your position at the store, and I'm starting to worry about your long-term plans." Kevin's expression shifted from annoyance to something approaching hostility. "Here we go again," he muttered, loud enough for me to hear clearly. "Can't I even eat breakfast without getting a lecture?" It's not a lecture, Kevin. I'm concerned about your future. You're 28 years old and you've been living here without contributing anything for over 2 years. Don't you think it's time to discuss some concrete steps toward independence? He set his phone down with deliberate force, the sound sharp against the granite countertop. Independence? You want to talk about independence, Mom? Let's talk about how you sit in this house all day doing absolutely nothing. At least I'm trying to figure out my next move. You're just rotting away here, living in the past and making everyone around you miserable with your constant nag. The words hung in the air between us like a toxic cloud, not just the content of what he'd said, but the cold deliberation behind it. This wasn't a moment of frustration or a comment made in anger. It was a calculated cruelty designed to hurt me as deeply as possible. The son I had raised, the child I had supported through every childhood illness and teenage crisis, had just described his grieving mother as someone who was rotting away in her own home. I felt something fundamental shift inside me in that moment. Not just anger, though that was certainly present, but a crystalline clarity about exactly who Kevin had become, and what I had allowed him to become through my misguided enabling. The sweet boy who used to bring me wildflowers from the backyard had disappeared completely, replaced by this entitled stranger who saw my kindness as weakness, and my home as his personal refuge from adult responsibilities. "Excuse me," I said quietly, my voice steady despite the rage building in my chest. Kevin shrugged, apparently emboldened by my calm response. "You heard me. You sit around here all day feeling sorry for yourself, criticizing everyone else's choices while you waste away in this house like some kind of ghost. At least I'm young enough to have options. You're just stuck here, rotting away, with nothing better to do than harass me about job applications." He picked up his phone and started walking toward his bedroom, apparently considering the conversation over. "I'm going to shower and then meet Ashley for lunch. Try not to spiral into another one of your pity parties while I'm gone." I sat in the kitchen for several minutes after he left, processing what had just happened. The casual cruelty of his words was shocking enough, but what truly stunned me was the complete absence of any recognition that his comfortable lifestyle was entirely dependent on my generosity. He had just insulted and dismissed the woman who paid for his food, his shelter, his car insurance, and his entertainment, then walked away as if he were the injured party. That afternoon, while Kevin was out spending money he hadn't earned on a lunch date with Ashley, I made 3 phone calls that would completely reshape his understanding of our relationship. The first was to Linda Rodriguez, my realtor friend, who had been gently suggesting for months that I consider my options regarding Kevin's indefinite residence in my home. "Linda," I said when she answered, "I need to know exactly what my house is worth in today's market, and I need to know how quickly we could get it sold if I decided to move forward." The second call was to my attorney, Robert Kim, who had handled Tom's estate and knew my financial situation intimately. "Robert, I need to understand my legal obligations regarding an adult child living in my home, specifically what kind of notice I'm required to give and what protections I have if that child refuses to leave voluntarily." The third call was to my neighbor, Patricia Williams, a retired school principal who had watched Kevin's transformation with the same concern I was beginning to acknowledge. "Pat, would you be available to document some conversations over the next few weeks? I may need witnesses to establish a pattern of behavior, and I trust your judgment completely." Each conversation confirmed what I already knew deep down, that I had far more power in this situation than Kevin realized, and that his comfortable assumption of permanent free housing was based on my tolerance rather than any legal right. The house was mine, purchased with my late husband and owned outright through his life insurance. Kevin had no tenant rights because he paid no rent, and had no lease agreement. Most importantly, I had absolutely no legal obligation to continue supporting an adult child who contributed nothing to the household and treated me with open contempt. That evening, I began documenting everything with the methodical approach I'd once used to track student progress in my classroom. Kevin's wake-up times, his eating patterns, his complete avoidance of household responsibilities, his financial dependence, and most crucially, his increasingly disrespectful treatment of me. I noted dates, times, and exact quotes, building a comprehensive picture of an adult child who had transformed my peaceful retirement into an unpaid caregiving situation. When Kevin returned from his lunch date that evening, he seemed to have forgotten our morning confrontation entirely. He greeted me with casual indifference, helped himself to leftovers from the refrigerator, and settled into his usual evening routine of gaming with friends online. His complete lack of acknowledgement or apology for his earlier cruelty confirmed everything I needed to know about his character and his assumptions about our relationship. Over the following days, I continued my research and documentation while maintaining the appearance of normal routine. Kevin seemed oblivious to any change in my demeanor, probably attributing my quiet mood to what he had called my pity parties. He continued his pattern of sleeping late, consuming my groceries, and treating our home like a free hotel with maid service included. The real estate market research Linda provided was eye-opening. Our house in the Maple Grove subdivision had appreciated significantly since Tom and I purchased it 15 years early. The 3-bedroom ranch that had cost us $230,000 was now worth $485,000 in the current market. More importantly, Linda explained that the demand for homes in our neighborhood was high enough that we could expect multiple offers within days of listing, possibly selling within 2 weeks of going on the market. The legal consultation with Robert Kim was equally illuminating. As the sole owner of the property, I had complete authority to sell the house whenever I chose. Kevin's residence there gave him no legal claim to the property or any right to prevent its sale. While I would be required to give him reasonable notice to vacate, typically 30 days in California, his complete financial dependence on me meant he had no legal recourse if I chose to sell and relocate. Most importantly, Robert confirmed that Kevin's verbal abuse and complete failure to contribute to household expenses actually strengthened my position if he chose to challenge my decisions legally. Adult children living rent-free in a parent's home have virtually no rights if that arrangement is terminated by the property owner, especially when their behavior has become detrimental to the parent's well-being. The neighbor documentation proved particularly valuable. Patricia Williams had indeed noticed Kevin's pattern of behavior, not just toward me, but in his interactions with others in the neighborhood. She had observed him being rude to delivery drivers, leaving trash from his car in our driveway, and playing loud music late at night without consideration for neighboring family. Her professional background as a school principal gave her insights into adult behavior patterns that would prove useful if Kevin decided to contest my decision. 2 weeks after Kevin's rotting away comment, I felt confident enough in my research and documentation to move forward with the next phase of my plan. The morning routine proceeded exactly as it had dozens of times before, Kevin stumbling into the kitchen around noon, consuming my food, leaving his mess for me to clean, and treating me like an inconvenient obstacle to his comfortable lifestyle. This time, however, I was ready for him. But this particular Tuesday would be different in ways Kevin couldn't possibly anticipate. I had spent the previous evening finalizing the details of what would become the most decisive action of my 62 years on this earth. The paperwork was organized, the phone calls had been made, and the wheels of change were already in motion before my ungrateful son had even opened his eyes that morning. Linda Rodriguez arrived at my house at exactly 9 o'clock, driving her silver Honda Accord instead of her usual real estate branded vehicle. We had agreed that discretion was essential for this phase of the operation. Kevin was still asleep, his bedroom door closed, and the familiar sounds of his gaming headset bleeding through the walls even in his unconscious state. Apparently, he had fallen asleep while connected to some online match, leaving his expensive equipment running all night on my electricity bill. "Are you absolutely certain about this, Maggie?" Linda asked as we sat at my kitchen table, her professional folio spread between us alongside a steaming pot of coffee. "Once we list this property, there's no putting the genie back in the bottle. The market is moving so fast right now that we could have offers within 48 hours. I looked around the kitchen that Tom and I had renovated together 7 years earlier. The custom cabinets we had saved for months to afford, the granite countertops he had insisted would last forever, the breakfast nook where we had shared thousands of morning conversations about our dreams for retirement. This house held decades of memories, most of them beautiful, but Kevin's presence had tainted even the most sacred spaces with his carelessness and contempt. "I've never been more certain of anything in my life," I replied, signing the listing agreement with the same steady hand that had graded thousands of student papers over 3 decades. "This house was supposed to be our sanctuary, Lynn. Tom and I worked so hard to create something beautiful here, and I've watched Kevin systematically destroy that peace with his selfishness and cruelty. It's time for both of us to learn what consequences really mean." Linda nodded, her expression shifting from concern to professional efficiency. As one of Riverside's most successful agents, she had handled her share of emotional property sales, but something about my situation seemed to resonate with her personally. Her own adult son had struggled with similar entitlement issues before a dose of reality had motivated him toward genuine independence. "The listing photos can be taken this afternoon while Kevin is out," she explained, reviewing the timeline we had established. "I'll coordinate with the photographer to focus on the home's best features while being respectful of the current living situation. The virtual tour can be completed tomorrow, and we should be live on the market by Thursday morning." The asking price we had settled on was $479,000, slightly below the appraised value to encourage multiple offers and a quick sale. Linda's market analysis suggested we could expect serious interest from young families looking to establish themselves in the Maple Grove neighborhood, drawn by the excellent schools and mature landscaping that Tom had spent years perfecting. "What about staging?" Linda asked, consulting her checklist. "The house shows well as it is, but we might want to consider some minor adjustments to maximize appeal." I had already thought about this extensively. Kevin's bedroom will need to be completely cleared and cleaned before any showing. I'll handle that myself once he's aware of the situation. The rest of the house just needs the personal items packed away and some fresh flowers in the main living area. As we finalized the listing details, I could hear Kevin stirring in his bedroom, the familiar sequence of sounds that marked his daily awakening. First, the gaming headset being removed and tossed carelessly onto his desk, then the groaning and stretching that seemed to last for 10 minutes. Finally, the shuffling footsteps toward the bathroom, where he would spend another 20 minutes before emerging to demand breakfast that someone else would prepare and clean up after. Linda gathered her paperwork and stood to leave, but paused at the kitchen doorway. "Maggie, I have to ask, have you thought about where you'll go after this sells? I know you mentioned wanting something smaller, but do you have a specific plan?" The question brought a smile to my face for the first time in weeks. "Actually, I do. Tom and I always talked about getting a small condo near the coast when we retired, something with ocean views and minimal maintenance, where we could walk to restaurants and shops instead of being tied down to yard work and home repairs." He never got to see that dream, but there's no reason I can't pursue it myself. Linda's expression brightened considerably. "That sounds wonderful. And honestly, the equity from this sale would give you plenty of options in that market. You could probably buy something outright, and still have money left over for travel or whatever else makes you happy." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. After Linda left, I spent the morning moving through my house with new eyes, seeing it not as the prison Kevin's presence had made it, but as the valuable asset it truly was. Every room represented years of careful investment and maintenance. From the hardwood floors Tom had refinished himself, to the updated electrical system we had installed 2 summers before his death, Kevin had been living in what amounted to a $500,000 residence without contributing a single penny toward its upkeep, while simultaneously treating the woman who owned it with open disdain. The irony wasn't lost on me that Kevin's comment about me rotting away in this house had actually crystallized my determination to sell it and start fresh. His cruel words had inadvertently given me the push I needed to pursue the coastal retirement Tom and I had always planned. In trying to hurt me, Kevin had actually set me free from the obligation I felt to maintain his comfortable living situation. Around noon, Kevin finally emerged from his bedroom wearing the same clothes he had worn to bed, his hair standing at odd angles, and his face bearing the impression marks from his pillow. He shuffled into the kitchen with his usual morning grumpiness, seemingly oblivious to the fact that a real estate agent had spent an hour at our kitchen table finalizing the sale of his free housing. "Is there any coffee left?" he asked, not bothering with pleasantries like good morning or acknowledgement of my presence. "There's a fresh pot," I replied calmly, watching as he poured himself a large mug and began rummaging through the refrigerator for something to eat. His breakfast choices were typically thoughtless. He took the last bagel without checking if I might want it, used up the remaining cream cheese and left the empty container on the counter for me to dispose of. I'm meeting Ashley for lunch at that new place downtown, he announced while scrolling through his phone. Can I borrow $40? I'll pay you back when I get that callback from the delivery company. The delivery company callback he mentioned was purely fictional. A story he had constructed to explain why he hadn't been actively job searching for the past 3 weeks. There was no pending employment opportunity, no interview scheduled, no prospect of income on the horizon. Kevin had simply grown comfortable with the lie, apparently believing that repeating it often enough would make me stop questioning his complete lack of motivation. Actually, Kevin, I think it's time we had a serious conversation about your living situation here, I said, setting down my coffee cup and facing him directly. His expression immediately shifted to defensive annoyance. Here we go again. Mom, I told you I'm working on getting back on my feet. These things take time, especially in this economy. You can't just snap your fingers and make opportunities appear. I'm not talking about opportunities, Kevin. I'm talking about basic respect and responsibility. You've been living here for over 2 years without contributing anything to household expenses, household maintenance, or even basic courtesy. Yesterday morning, you told me I was rotting away in my own home. Do you remember saying that? Kevin's face flushed slightly, but instead of apologizing, he doubled down on his position. I was frustrated. Okay, you're constantly on my case about stuff that doesn't even matter. So what if I don't do the dishes immediately? So what if I sleep in? I'm dealing with a lot of stress right now, and your constant nagging doesn't help. The complete absence of any acknowledgement or remorse confirmed everything I needed to know about his character. Not only did Kevin feel no guilt about his cruel comment, he was actually justifying it as a reasonable response to my nagging. In his mind, asking him to contribute to the household or clean up after himself constituted harassment that warranted verbal abuse. Kevin, I want you to really think about what you just said. You believe that asking you to wash your dishes and contribute to household expenses justifies telling your mother that she's rotting away in her own home. Does that seem reasonable to you? He rolled his eyes with theatrical exaggeration. You're being dramatic, Mom. It's not that big of a deal. People say things when they're frustrated. You need to stop taking everything so personally. The casual dismissal of his cruelty was breathtaking in its audacity. Not only was Kevin refusing to apologize, he was now telling me that my hurt feelings were an overreaction to his reasonable expression of frustration. The manipulation was so complete that I almost had to admire its effectiveness, if it weren't being deployed against the woman who had sacrificed years of her own comfort to support his extended adolescence. I see, I said quietly. So in your opinion, verbal abuse is an acceptable response to reasonable requests, and any hurt feelings on my part are an overreaction. Kevin shrugged, apparently oblivious to the trap he was walking into. Look, I'm not trying to hurt your feelings, but you have to admit you've been kind of negative lately. Ever since Dad died, you've been stuck in this house, not really engaging with life. Maybe instead of focusing on my problems, you should think about getting some hobbies or something. The suggestion that I should develop hobbies to distract myself from his problems was so remarkably tone-deaf that I almost laughed out loud. Here was a 28-year-old man who spent 16 hours a day playing video games, lecturing his recently widowed mother about the need to engage with life more meaningfully. The complete lack of self-awareness was almost impressive in its thoroughness. You're right, Kevin. I have been stuck in this house, and I haven't been engaging with life in meaningful ways. That's actually something I've been thinking about quite seriously lately. Something in my tone seemed to register with him, because his defensive expression shifted slightly toward uncertainty. What do you mean? I mean that you've helped me realize that my current living situation isn't working for either of us. You need space to become the independent adult you clearly want to be, and I need to pursue the retirement lifestyle that will make me happy. Staying in this arrangement isn't helping either of us grow. Kevin's frown deepened as he tried to process what I was saying. The possibility that his comfortable living situation might be temporary had apparently never occurred to him. In his mind, my house was simply his permanent base of operations, available indefinitely regardless of his behavior or contribution level. Are you saying you want me to move out? He asked, a note of genuine concern creeping into his voice for the first time in months. I'm saying that I think it's time for both of us to make some changes. You're 28 years old, Kevin. Most people your age are building careers, establishing their own households, creating their own lives. Living with your mother rent-free for over 2 years isn't helping you develop the skills you need for true independence. The concern in his expression was rapidly being replaced by indignation. So this is about money. You want me to pay rent now? Mom, you know I'm between jobs right now. I can't just pull money out of thin air. It's not about money, Kevin. It's about respect, responsibility, and mutual consideration. You've made it clear that you view this house as your personal accommodation, and me as your personal assistant. That dynamic isn't healthy for either of us. Kevin set down his coffee mug with enough force to make me flinch. This is unbelievable. I'm going through a rough patch, and instead of supporting me, you're threatening to kick me out. What kind of mother does that? The manipulation was textbook emotional blackmail, designed to make me feel guilty for establishing reasonable boundaries. The suggestion that expecting basic respect and consideration made me a bad mother was particularly galling, given the years of sacrifices I had made to support his extended transition to adulthood. Kevin, supporting you doesn't mean enabling behavior that's harmful to both of us. A good mother prepares her child for independence, not perpetual dependence. What I've been doing isn't helping you. It's preventing you from developing the skills you need to succeed on your own. Skills? Kevin's voice rose to a near shout. What skill? You want me to develop the skill of being homeless? The skill of not being able to afford food? This is my home too, Mom. I grew up here. You can't just decide I don't belong here anymore. The claim that this was his home too revealed the depth of his entitlement. Kevin genuinely believed that growing up in this house gave him some permanent right to live here indefinitely, regardless of his behavior or contribution. The idea that his residence was dependent on my generosity and goodwill had never entered his consciousness. This house belongs to me, Kevin. Your father and I worked for 30 years to pay for it, and when he died, ownership transferred to me alone. You have no legal claim to this property, and your right to live here depends entirely on my willingness to allow it. Kevin's face went pale as the reality of his situation began to penetrate his sense of entitlement. You're not serious. You wouldn't actually kick out your own son. I'm not kicking you out, Kevin. I'm giving you the motivation you apparently need to become a self-sufficient adult. You have skills, intelligence, and opportunities. You've just chosen not to pursue them because living here for free is easier. This is insane, Kevin muttered, pacing around the kitchen like a caged animal. You're acting like I'm some kind of criminal just because I need a little help getting back on my feet. A little help for over 2 years, during which you've contributed nothing, and treated me with increasing disrespect. Kevin, if you were renting an apartment and treated your landlord the way you've been treating me, you would have been evicted months ago. The comparison to a rental situation seemed to strike home in a way my other arguments had. Kevin stopped pacing and stared at me with something approaching genuine surprise, as if the idea of consequences for his behavior was a foreign concept. How long? He asked quietly. How long what? How long do I? The question revealed that he was finally beginning to understand the seriousness of the situation. His comfortable assumption of permanent free housing was crumbling, and the reality of having to support himself was becoming impossible to ignore. I think 30 days is reasonable, I said calmly. That gives you time to find employment, save for a deposit, and locate an apartment. It's the same notice period that any landlord would provide. Kevin slumped into one of the kitchen chairs, his bravado completely deflated. 30 days. Mom, that's not enough time. Do you have any idea how expensive apartments are around here? And I don't have any money saved up for deposits and all that stuff. Then I suggest you start making some calls about employment opportunity. The job market is actually quite good right now for people who are willing to work entry-level positions and build their way up. Entry-level positions don't pay enough to afford rent in this area, Kevin protested. I'd have to get some minimum wage job and live in some crappy apartment in a bad neighborhood. The horror in his voice at the prospect of earning minimum wage and living modestly was revealing. Kevin had become so accustomed to his subsidized lifestyle that the idea of working for basic necessities seemed like cruel and unusual punishment. The notion that millions of people his age managed to support themselves on entry-level salaries apparently hadn't occurred to him. Many people start with minimum wage jobs and work their way up to better positions, I pointed out. Your father started as a stock clerk at a hardware store and eventually became the assistant manager. Success usually requires starting somewhere and proving your worth through consistent effort. That was different, Kevin said, dismissively. The economy was better then, jobs paid more relative to living expenses. It's not fair to compare Dad's situation to what I'm dealing with now. The excuse was familiar because Kevin had used variations of it to explain every failure and missed opportunity over the past 2 years. The economy, the job market, employer expectations, generational differences. There was always some external factor responsible for his lack of progress. The possibility that his own attitude and effort level might be contributing to his situation was never considered. Kevin, I've been tracking job openings in this area for the past 2 weeks. There are currently 43 entry-level positions available within a 20-minute drive of this house. Retail, food service, delivery, customer service, warehouse work. Plenty of opportunities for someone willing to start somewhere and prove themselves. His expression shifted to surprise and then suspicion. You've been tracking job openings. Why? Because I wanted to understand the reality of the employment market before having this conversation. Your claims about lack of opportunities don't match the actual data. Kevin was quiet for several minutes, apparently processing this information and its implications for his comfortable narrative of victimhood. The revelation that jobs were available meant he could no longer use market conditions as an excuse for his extended unemployment. What if I can't find anything in 30 days? He asked finally. Then you'll need to expand your search area or lower your expectations about starting salary. Kevin, the goal isn't to immediately replace the lifestyle you've been living here. The goal is to begin supporting yourself and building toward independence. And if I refuse to leave, the question hung in the air between us, revealing the underlying power dynamic that had been implicit in our relationship for months. Kevin was finally acknowledging that his comfortable situation depended entirely on my cooperation, and he was testing whether I had the resolve to enforce consequences for his behavior. Then I'll pursue legal eviction proceedings, I said calmly. You would have an eviction on your credit record, which would make it much harder to rent apartments in the future. It would be far better for both of us if you chose to leave voluntarily and maintain your dignity in the process. Kevin stared at me for a long moment, apparently searching for some sign that I wasn't serious about this ultimatum. Whatever he saw in my expression seemed to convince him that his comfortable free ride was genuinely coming to an end. I need to call Ashley, he said finally, standing up from the table. This affects her too. As Kevin walked back toward his bedroom, I felt a complex mixture of emotion. Sadness for the relationship that had deteriorated to this point, relief that I had finally found the courage to establish boundaries, and determination to follow through regardless of his reaction. The conversation had gone exactly as I had expected. Denial, manipulation, excuses, and finally reluctant acceptance of reality. What Kevin didn't know was that 30 days was actually an optimistic timeline from his perspective. The for sale sign would be going up in our front yard in less than 48 hours, and once potential buyers started scheduling showings, his comfortable living situation would become untenable much more quickly than he anticipated. But I decided to let him discover that reality at the same time as the rest of the neighborhood. The afternoon photographer session went smoothly, with Linda coordinating the timing to capture the house during optimal lighting conditions. Kevin had left for his lunch date with Ashley before the photographer arrived, allowing us to work without having to navigate around his presence or explain the situation prematurely. Walking through my house with fresh eyes as it was being photographed for marketing purposes, I felt a renewed appreciation for what Tom and I had created together. The photographer's enthusiasm for the property was infectious. He commented repeatedly on the excellent condition of the hardwood floors, the updated kitchen, and the mature landscaping that would appeal to potential buyers. This is going to show beautifully, he assured me as he packed up his equipment. The natural light in that living room is incredible, and the kitchen renovation is exactly what buyers are looking for in this price range. I'd expect multiple offers within the first week. That evening, Kevin returned from his outing with Ashley in a subdued mood that suggested he had shared news of our morning conversation with his girlfriend. His usual evening routine of gaming and snacking proceeded with less enthusiasm than normal, and he actually cleaned up his dinner dishes without being asked, the first time he had done so in months. Around 10 o'clock he knocked on my bedroom door, something he hadn't done since moving back in. "Mom? Can we talk for a minute?" I found him standing in the hallway looking younger and more uncertain than he had in years. The arrogant entitlement that had characterized his recent behavior seemed to have evaporated, replaced by something approaching genuine humility. "Ashley thinks you're right," he said quietly, "about me needing to become more independent. She's been worried about our relationship because she knows I can't really support myself right now. She doesn't want to be with someone who's completely dependent on his mother." The admission was clearly difficult for him to make, representing the first crack in the defensive shell he had constructed around his lifestyle choices. Ashley's perspective seemed to carry weight with him in a way that mine hadn't, perhaps because her opinion affected his romantic prospects rather than just his living situation. "Ashley is a smart young woman," I replied carefully. "What do you think about her concerns?" Kevin was quiet for a moment, apparently struggling with unfamiliar self-reflection. "I guess I haven't been thinking about how this affects other people. I've been so focused on my own problems that I didn't consider how my behavior was impacting you or her or anyone else." The acknowledgement was more progress than I had seen from him in months. For the first time, Kevin seemed to be genuinely considering the possibility that his choices had consequences beyond his own immediate comfort. "I don't want to lose Ashley," he continued, "and I don't want to keep fighting with you, but I'm scared, Mom. I don't know how to start over at 28. All my friends seem to have figured out their careers already, and I feel like I'm way behind." The vulnerability in his voice was heartbreaking, reminding me of the little boy who used to come to me with scraped knees and hurt feelings. For a moment, I wavered in my resolve, tempted to offer reassurance and an extension of his deadline. But I forced myself to remember that enabling his dependence wasn't helping him develop the resilience he would need for genuine success. "Being scared is normal, Kevin. Starting over is difficult at any age, but 28 is actually still quite young. You have plenty of time to build a career and create the life you want. The important thing is to start taking action instead of waiting for the perfect opportunity." "Will you help me?" he asked, not financially, but with advice and support. "I don't really know how to look for apartments or negotiate salaries or any of that adult stuff." The request represented a fundamental shift in our dynamic. Instead of demanding that I solve his problems for him, Kevin was asking for guidance while accepting responsibility for the actual work. It was the first healthy interaction we had shared in months. "Of course I'll help you with advice and support," I assured him. "That's what mothers are supposed to do. Help their children develop the skills they need for independence, not do everything for them." Kevin nodded, looking relieved. "Can we start tomorrow? Looking at job applications and apartment listings and making a real plan?" "Absolutely. But Kevin, I need you to understand that the 30-day timeline isn't negotiable. This isn't a trial period where you can prove yourself and earn an extension. This is a genuine deadline, and your success will be measured by your ability to become self-sufficient by that day." "I understand," he said, and for the first time in months I believed he actually did. As I prepared for bed that night, I felt cautiously optimistic about Kevin's change in attitude. Whether his newfound motivation would translate into sustained effort remained to be seen, but at least he seemed to finally understand the seriousness of his situation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, as he began the difficult work of rebuilding his independence. But for the first time in years, I felt like I was actually helping him rather than enabling his dependence. What Kevin still didn't know was that his motivation would be tested much sooner than he anticipated. The for sale sign would appear in our front yard within 48 hours, and the reality of strangers touring his childhood home would make his situation far more urgent than 30 days might suggest. But I decided that particular revelation could wait until the listing went live. One shock at a time seemed like the most merciful approach to his education in consequences and reality. Thursday morning arrived with the kind of crisp October sunshine that made everything seem possible. I was up at 6, enjoying my coffee and watching the sunrise paint golden streaks across my backyard when my phone chimed with a text from Linda Rodriguez. Listing goes live in 30 minutes. Are you ready for this? I typed back quickly. More ready than I've ever been, for anything. Kevin was still asleep as usual, completely unaware that his world was about to shift in ways he couldn't imagine. The irony wasn't lost on me that while he had spent the previous evening making earnest promises about job searching and apartment hunting, his comfortable timeline was about to be dramatically accelerated by forces already in motion. At exactly 8 o'clock, Linda called to confirm that our property was now officially listed on the multiple listing service. Within minutes, it would appear on Zillow, Realtor.com, and every other major real estate platform. The professional photographs showcased our home beautifully, highlighting the warm hardwood floors, the updated kitchen with its granite countertops, and the spacious living areas that had attracted Tom and me 15 years earlier. I've already received 3 inquiries from agents wanting to schedule showings for their clients, Linda reported excitedly. The market demand in Maple Grove is even stronger than I anticipated. I wouldn't be surprised if we have our first showing request before noon. The speed of the response was both thrilling and terrifying. After months of Kevin's stagnation and my own hesitation about making major changes, the real estate market was moving with a velocity that left no room for second guessing. Once potential buyers started walking through our home, Kevin's presence would become increasingly awkward for everyone involved. Around 9:30, I was organizing paperwork in the kitchen when I heard the distinctive rumble of a truck pulling up outside. Through the window, I watched 2 men in matching polo shirts climb out of a white pickup truck and begin unloading something from the back. My heart rate quickened as I realized what was happening. The for sale sign was being installed. The workers moved efficiently, using a post-hole digger to create a neat opening in our front lawn before sliding the metal stake into place. The sign itself was larger than I had expected, featuring Linda's professional headshot alongside the company logo and the words "for sale" in bold red letters that would be visible from 3 houses away. One of the installation crew knocked on the front door to confirm the positioning and collect my signature on their work order. As I signed the paperwork, Kevin's bedroom door opened and he shuffled toward the bathroom, still half asleep and completely oblivious to the activity happening 30 feet from his window. "Beautiful property, ma'am," the installer commented as he prepared to leave. "My wife and I looked at houses in this neighborhood last year. You should have no trouble finding buyers in this market." After they drove away, I stood in my front yard studying the sign that would fundamentally alter my relationship with this house and with Kevin. For 15 years, this had been our private sanctuary, the Chen family home where we celebrated holidays and weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical. Now it was officially a commodity, a product to be marketed and sold to the highest bidder. The transformation felt both liberating and melancholy. Every room held memories of Kevin's childhood, from the living room where he had opened Christmas presents, to the backyard where Tom had taught him to throw a baseball. But those sweet memories had been increasingly overshadowed by the frustration and resentment of the past 2 years. Selling the house meant closing one chapter of our lives, but it also meant opening new possibilities for both of us. I was back in the kitchen, updating my moving timeline spreadsheet when I heard Kevin's footsteps approaching. He moved with his typical morning sluggishness, heading straight for the coffee maker without acknowledging my presence or looking toward the front windows that would have revealed the dramatic change to our front yard. "Morning," he mumbled, pouring himself a large mug and beginning his usual survey of available breakfast options. "I was thinking about what we talked about last night. Maybe we could look at job applications after I get back from meeting Ashley this afternoon." The casual timeline he was proposing, looking at applications in the afternoon with no sense of urgency about actually submitting them, demonstrated that his newfound motivation was still operating on his familiar schedule of minimal effort and delayed action. Kevin seemed to believe that acknowledging the need for change was equivalent to actually implementing it. "That sounds like a good start," I replied carefully, but you might want to consider moving more quickly than that. The job market is competitive, and 30 days isn't as much time as it might seem." Kevin shrugged, apparently unconcerned by the timeline. 30 days is plenty of time to find something decent. I'm not planning to take just any random job. I want to find something with growth potential where I can use my skills. The comment revealed that Kevin still didn't understand the reality of his situation. After being unemployed for 9 months, he was in no position to be selective about growth potential or using his skills. His priority needed to be immediate income generation, not career optimization. But I decided to let the job market teach him that lesson rather than arguing with him about it. "Well, I'll let you get started on your research," I said, gathering my coffee cup and newspaper. "I have some errands to run this morning." As I moved toward the living room, Kevin finally happened to glance toward the front windows. The progression of emotions across his face was fascinating to watch: confusion, recognition, shock, and finally panic as he processed what he was seeing. "Mom," he called out, his voice sharp with alarm, "there's a for sale sign in our front yard." I paused in the living room doorway, maintaining a neutral expression. "Yes, I noticed that." Kevin appeared in the kitchen doorway, coffee mug in hand, staring at me with wide eyes. "What do you mean you noticed it? Did someone put it there by mistake? Should we call the real estate company?" The genuine bewilderment in his voice suggested he hadn't made the connection between our conversation about him moving out and the appearance of the sign. In Kevin's mind, the house was simply a permanent fixture of his existence, as unchangeable as the mountains or the ocean. The possibility that I might sell it had never entered his consciousness. "It's not a mistake, Kevin. I listed the house for sale yesterday." The words seemed to hit him like a physical blow. He set his coffee mug down carefully, as if his hands were no longer entirely under his control. "You what?" "I listed the house for sale. The sign went up this morning, and we should start showing requests within the next few hours." Kevin stared at me in stunned silence for several seconds before finding his voice. "You can't be serious. You're selling our house, without even discussing it with me." The possessive pronoun he used was telling. In Kevin's mind, this was our house, despite his complete lack of financial contribution to its purchase, maintenance, or upkeep. His sense of ownership was based purely on residence and childhood memories, with no consideration for the legal and financial realities of property ownership. "This is my house, Kevin. I own it outright, and I can sell it whenever I choose. I don't need anyone's permission or approval to make decisions about my own property. But where am I supposed to live?" The question came out as almost a wail, revealing the depth of his panic at having his comfortable arrangement suddenly threatened. "That's exactly what we discussed yesterday. You have 30 days to find alternative housing, which should be more than enough time for someone who's motivated to make the necessary changes." Kevin began pacing around the kitchen, running his hands through his hair in agitation. 30 days? Mom, you can't sell a house in 30 days. Real estate transactions take months to complete. We have time to figure this out. The comment demonstrated Kevin's complete ignorance about real estate markets and current economic conditions. His assumption that we had time to figure this out revealed his expectation that I would somehow accommodate his preferences in my decision-making process. Actually, Kevin, in this market houses are selling within days of being listed. Linda expects we'll have multiple offers by the end of the week, and closings are happening in 3 to 4 weeks. You might have significantly less than 30 days to find somewhere else to live. The color drained from Kevin's face as the reality of his situation began to penetrate his shock. You planned this. Yesterday when you talked about me moving out, you had already decided to sell the house. You were just pretending to give me a choice. His accusation contained a grain of truth, though not in the way he intended. I had indeed been planning the sale while offering him the opportunity to leave voluntarily, but Kevin's interpretation ignored the months of warning signs he had dismissed, and the years of enabling behavior he had taken for granted. "Kevin, I've been considering selling this house for almost a year. It's too large for one person, too expensive to maintain on a fixed income, and it holds too many painful memories of your father. Your behavior over the past few months simply helped me realize that staying here wasn't benefiting either of us, so this is punishment," Kevin said bitterly. "You're selling the house to punish me for not finding a job fast enough." The victim narrative he was constructing was predictable but infuriating. Rather than accepting responsibility for his choices and their consequences, Kevin was framing my decision as an unreasonable punishment inflicted by a vindictive mother. "This isn't punishment, Kevin. This is me making a decision that's best for my future and my well-being. The fact that it forces you to become independent is a side benefit, not the primary motivation." "Where are you going to live?" he asked, apparently hoping to find some flaw in my planning that would force me to reconsider. "I'm looking at condominiums near the coast, something smaller, with ocean views and minimal maintenance requirements. The kind of retirement your father and I always planned, but never got to pursue together." The mention of Tom seemed to hit Kevin harder than anything else I had said. For the first time, he appeared to consider that this decision might be about my needs and dreams rather than his behavior and consequences. "Dad would have wanted you to stay here," he said quietly. This was his house too. He loved working in the garden and fixing things around the property. "Selling it feels like you're giving up on everything he built." The emotional manipulation was sophisticated, designed to make me feel guilty for pursuing my own happiness rather than preserving a shrine to Tom's memory. But Kevin's argument ignored the reality that Tom had always prioritized my well-being over sentimental attachment to possessions. "Your father would have wanted me to be happy, Kevin. He wouldn't have expected me to maintain a house I can't afford and deal with a living situation that's causing me stress and unhappiness just to preserve his memory. Dad's legacy isn't in this building. It's in the values he taught us and the love he shared with our family." Kevin slumped against the kitchen counter, apparently overwhelmed by the magnitude of the changes suddenly confronting him. "I don't understand how this happened so fast. Yesterday we were talking about me finding a job, and today you're selling the house. It feels like everything is spinning out of control, Kevin. The only thing that's changed is your awareness of the situation. I've been unhappy with our living arrangement for months. You've been unemployed for almost a year, and this house has been too large for my needs since your father died. The problems didn't appear overnight. You just haven't been paying attention to them." My phone rang at that moment, displaying Linda's number on the screen. "I need to take this," I told Kevin, answering the call. "Maggie, I have incredible news." Linda's voice bubbled with excitement. "We've received 6 showing requests in the past 2 hours. And one agent has already asked about the possibility of submitting an offer sight unseen based on the online photos. Can you accommodate showings this afternoon and tomorrow morning?" I glanced at Kevin, who was listening to my side of the conversation with growing alarm. "Yes, I can accommodate showings. What times are we looking at?" "I have requests for 2 o'clock, 4 o'clock, and 6 o'clock today, plus 9 o'clock and 11 o'clock tomorrow morning." "Should I confirm all of them?" "Confirm them all," I said, watching Kevin's face grow paler with each time slot I accepted. After hanging up, I turned to find Kevin staring at me with an expression of pure disbelief. "Showings? People are coming to look at the house today." 5 showings over the next 24 hours, I confirmed. "The first one is at 2 o'clock this afternoon." Kevin sat down heavily in one of the kitchen chairs, apparently struggling to process the speed at which his comfortable world was disintegrating. "Where am I supposed to go during these showings? I can't just disappear for hours at a time every day." "That's something you'll need to figure out, Kevin. Potential buyers want to see the house without current residents present, so you'll need to make arrangements to be elsewhere during showing times." "This is insane," Kevin muttered, shaking his head repeatedly. "You can't just upend someone's entire life with 12 hours notice." "Kevin, I gave you years of notice through my increasing frustration with our living arrangement. I gave you months of notice through my comments about your need for independence. I gave you days of notice during our conversation yesterday. The only thing that's sudden is the market response to the listing." Kevin's phone buzzed with a text message, providing a brief distraction from our conversation. As he read the message, his expression shifted to even deeper distress. Ashley wants to meet for lunch to talk about our relationship, he said quietly. She's been thinking about what I told her yesterday, and she wants to discuss where things are going between us. The timing of Ashley's request suggested that Kevin's revelation about his housing situation had prompted her to reevaluate their relationship. Young women in their 20s typically wanted partners who could offer stability and independence, not grown men living rent-free with their mother. Maybe that conversation will provide additional motivation for your job search, I suggested gently. You don't understand, Kevin said, his voice taking on a desperate edge. Ashley is the best thing in my life right now. If I lose her because of this situation, I'll have nothing left. No job, no home, no relationship, nothing. The depth of his panic was both heartbreaking and instructive. For the first time, Kevin was confronting the possibility that his choices might have consequences that extended beyond his own comfort. The threat to his relationship with Ashley represented a wake-up call that my concerns about his behavior had failed to provide. Then I suggest you use that motivation to take immediate action, I replied. You have approximately 4 hours before the first house show. That's enough time to submit applications to a dozen different employers and schedule several apartment viewings for this weekend. Kevin looked at me with something approaching desperation. Mom, please. Can't we work something else out? Maybe I could pay rent and contribute to household expenses. I'll get a job, any job, and start helping with the house maintenance and cleaning. We don't have to sell the house to solve our problem. The offer represented the first time Kevin had ever suggested paying rent or contributing to household expenses. But it came far too late to change the trajectory of events already in motion. More importantly, his proposal was based on promises rather than demonstrated behavior changes. Kevin, you've had over 2 years to make those choices voluntarily. The fact that you're only offering to contribute now when your comfortable situation is threatened tells me everything I need to know about your motivation and priorities. But I'm offering now, Kevin insists. Doesn't that count for something? I realize I've been taking advantage of your generosity, and I want to make it right. Making it right means becoming independent and building your own life, not finding new ways to remain dependent while contributing just enough to ease your guilt. Kevin was quiet for several minutes, apparently searching for new arguments or compromises that might change my mind. When he spoke again, his voice was smaller and more vulnerable than I had heard in months. I'm scared, Mom. I don't know how to be an adult. Everyone else my age seems to have figured it out, but I feel like I'm still pretending to know what I'm doing. Living here felt safe, even if I wasn't handling it well. The admission was the first genuine moment of self-awareness Kevin had shown in years. His acknowledgement that he didn't know how to be an adult was both heartbreaking and validating. Heartbreaking because it revealed the depth of his insecurity, and validating because it confirmed that my enabling behavior had indeed prevented him from developing necessary life skills. Being scared is normal, Kevin. Most adults are scared much of the time. We just get better at functioning despite the fear. The difference is that successful adults use their fear as motivation to take action, rather than as an excuse to avoid responsibility. Will you help me figure it out? He asked. Not by letting me stay here, but by teaching me the things I should have learned already. I don't even know how to read apartment leases or negotiate salaries, or any of that stuff. The request represented a fundamental shift in Kevin's approach to our relationship. Instead of demanding that I solve his problems, he was asking me to teach him the skills he needed to solve them himself. It was the first healthy dynamic we had shared in years. Of course I'll help you learn those skills, I assured him. That's what parents should do. Prepare their children for independence, not prevent them from achieving it. Kevin nodded, looking both relieved and terrified. Can we start today? After my lunch with Ashley but before the house showing? I need to have something concrete to tell her about my plans. Absolutely. But Kevin, I need you to understand that learning these skills and implementing them successfully will take time and effort. The house sale is still moving forward regardless of your progress. So you need to be prepared for the possibility that you'll be figuring things out from your own apartment, rather than from here. I understand, Kevin said, and for the first time in months, I believed he actually did. As Kevin prepared to leave for his lunch with Ashley, I felt a complex mixture of emotion. Pride that he was finally showing genuine motivation to change, sadness that it had taken such dramatic circumstances to prompt his growth, and determination to follow through with the sale regardless of his newfound cooperation. The for sale sign in our front yard represented more than just a real estate transaction. It was a symbol of my refusal to continue enabling behavior that was harmful to both of us. Kevin's promises of change were encouraging, but they were still just words. Actions would determine whether he was truly ready to become the independent adult he needed to be. At 1:30, I began preparing the house for the first showing. Kevin's bedroom required significant attention, clothes scattered across the floor, gaming equipment cluttering every surface, and a smell that suggested inadequate ventilation and poor hygiene habits. As I worked to make the space presentable, I found myself imagining how different things might have been if I had established firmer boundaries years earlier. By the time the first potential buyers arrived at 2 o'clock, the house was pristine, and Kevin was nowhere to be seen. As I watched a young couple walk through the rooms that had housed our family for 15 years, I felt a profound sense of closure beginning to settle over me. This chapter of my life was ending, but the next one held possibilities that Kevin's presence had prevented me from pursuing. The couple spent 45 minutes examining every detail of the property, from the updated electrical system to the mature fruit trees in the backyard. Their enthusiasm was evident as they discussed the potential for expanding the master bathroom and converting the third bedroom into a home office. They saw the house not as a shrine to past memories, but as a foundation for future dreams. After they left, I stood in my empty living room and felt lighter than I had in years. Kevin's rotting away comment had been cruel and inaccurate, but it had inadvertently given me the motivation I needed to pursue the coastal retirement Tom and I had always planned. Sometimes the most painful moments in our lives are also the most transformative, forcing us to make changes we never would have considered under more comfortable circumstances. The remaining showings that day brought similar enthusiasm from potential buyers, confirming Linda's prediction that we would receive multiple offers quickly. By evening, Kevin had returned from his lunch with Ashley looking subdued but determined. Whatever conversation they had shared had apparently reinforced his motivation to make genuine changes in his life. "How did the showings go?" he asked as we sat down to review job applicants and apartment listings together. "Very well," I replied. "I expect we'll have our first offer by tomorrow evening." Kevin nodded quietly, apparently accepting the reality that his comfortable life was genuinely ending. But for the first time in months, he seemed ready to face that reality with effort and determination, rather than denial and excuses. The next few weeks would test whether his newfound motivation could sustain the difficult work of building genuine independence. The next 2 weeks transformed our household into something resembling a well-oiled machine, though not in ways Kevin had anticipated when he first promised to change his behavior. True to his word, he had thrown himself into job searching with an intensity that surprised both of us. His laptop, which had previously been dedicated exclusively to gaming and social media, now displayed a constant rotation of employment websites, application forms, and interview preparation material. I watched this transformation with cautious optimism, impressed by his newfound dedication, while remaining realistic about the challenges ahead. Kevin had submitted applications to 47 different positions, ranging from retail associate to delivery driver, to customer service representative. His initial resistance to entry-level work had evaporated once he realized that his complete lack of recent employment history left him with limited options for immediate income generation. The house showings had continued at a relentless pace, with Linda scheduling between 3 and 5 appointments daily. Kevin had adapted to this disruption with remarkable grace, timing his job interviews and apartment viewings to coincide with potential buyer visits. His previous complaints about the inconvenience seemed trivial compared to the reality of strangers evaluating his childhood bedroom and discussing renovation plans for the kitchen, where he had eaten thousands of meals. "I had no idea how much work went into selling a house," Kevin admitted one evening as we reviewed his progress over dinner. Every day there are people walking through here, judging everything from the carpet stains to the landscape. It's like living in a museum where you're not allowed to touch anything. The observation revealed a level of awareness that Kevin had rarely demonstrated during his extended residency. For the first time, he was considering how his lifestyle choices affected not just his own comfort, but the impressions others formed about our home. The gaming equipment that had cluttered the living room for months had been carefully organized and his laundry was actually being washed and folded rather than left in piles around the house. It's taught me to see our house differently, I replied, pleased by his newfound consideration. When potential buyers walk through here, they're not just looking at rooms, they're imagining their own lives in these spaces. Your effort to keep everything tidy makes their vision easier to achieve. Kevin nodded thoughtfully, pushing food around his plate with the distracted air of someone processing multiple complex thoughts simultaneously. Ashley noticed the difference too. She said it feels more like a real home now instead of a place where someone just crashes temporarily. The mention of Ashley brought a smile to my face. Kevin's relationship with his girlfriend had stabilized considerably once he began demonstrating genuine effort toward independence. Their conversations had shifted from his complaints about unfair circumstances to excited discussions about apartments they might be able to afford once he secured employment. Ashley had even begun contributing her own research, identifying neighborhood options, and calculating potential budgets based on various salary scenarios. How did your interview at the electronics store go today? I asked, referring to his afternoon appointment at a retailer similar to his previous employer. Better than expected, Kevin replied with cautious optimism. The manager remembered me from when I worked at Circuit Junction downtown. He said my experience with customer service and inventory management would transfer well to their operation. They're supposed to call me back by Friday with a decision. The possibility of Kevin securing employment at a place where his previous experience was valued represented a significant step forward from the generic applications he had been submitting to employers who saw him as just another resume in a stack of hundreds. His growing understanding of how to leverage his limited work history demonstrated the kind of strategic thinking that had been absent from his approach to adult responsibilities. That sounds promising, I encouraged. What about the apartment situation? Have you scheduled any viewings for this weekend? Kevin's expression grew more complicated. I've got 3 appointments on Saturday, but I'm worried about the affordability issue. Even if I get the electronics store job, the starting salary is only going to be about $15 an hour. After taxes, that's maybe $2,000 a month, and most of the decent apartments I've looked at want at least $1,200 just for rent. The financial reality of independent living was proving to be Kevin's most challenging adjustment. After years of free housing, utilities, and food, the prospect of dedicating 60% of his income to basic shelter was genuinely shocking. His calculations didn't even account for groceries, transportation, insurance, or the hundreds of small expenses that constitute adult life. Have you considered finding a roommate? I suggested gently. Many people your age share housing costs with friends or acquaintances. It's not ideal, but it can make independent living financially feasible while you build your career. Kevin had clearly thought about this option but was struggling with the ego implications. I mentioned it to Ashley and she knows a few people who might be interested, but it's embarrassing to be almost 30 and still need a roommate to afford a basic apartment. Most of my friends from high school are buying houses and starting families. The comparison to his peers' achievements was painful but necessary. Kevin had spent the past 2 years insulated from the reality that his contemporaries were advancing through normal adult milestones, while he remained financially and emotionally dependent on his mother. The gap between his current situation and age-appropriate expectations was substantial, but acknowledging it represented the first step toward addressing it. Kevin, everyone's timeline is different, I reminded him. The important thing is that you're making progress now, not that you're behind some arbitrary schedule. Having a roommate at 28 is much more common than you might think, especially in expensive housing markets like Southern California. Our conversation was interrupted by the doorbell, signaling the arrival of another potential buyer for the evening showing. Kevin immediately began gathering his dinner dishes and laptop, having learned to clear his personal items efficiently when real estate agents appeared. The routine had become second nature over the past 2 weeks, though I could see the emotional toll it was taking on him to repeatedly pack up his belongings and temporarily vacate his childhood home. "I'll be at the coffee shop on Pine Street," Kevin said, grabbing his jacket. "Text me when they're finished, and I'll come back to help you reset everything for tomorrow's morning showing." The consideration in his offer touched me deep. Kevin had begun anticipating the work required to maintain the house in showing condition, offering assistance without being asked, and demonstrating awareness of how his presence or absence affected the process. This collaborative approach represented a fundamental shift from his previous attitude of entitled indifference. The evening's potential buyers were a family with 2 young children, who spent considerable time examining the backyard and discussing the neighborhood school district rating. Their enthusiasm for the property was evident as they measured rooms and talked about furniture placement. The father mentioned that they had been searching for months without finding anything that met their needs and budget simultaneously. "This is exactly what we've been looking for," the mother told Linda as they prepared to leave. "The location is perfect, the house is in beautiful condition, and the price is reasonable for the current market. We'd like to discuss making an offer." Linda's excitement was carefully contained but visible in her bright smile and animated gestures. "I'll prepare the paperwork and send it over first thing tomorrow morning. Based on the interest we've seen, I'd recommend your strongest possible offer if you're serious about this property." After they left, I felt a mixture of satisfaction and melancholy. The house that had sheltered our family for 15 years was clearly going to find new owners who would appreciate its qualities and create their own memories within its walls. The transition felt both natural and bittersweet, marking the end of one chapter while opening possibilities for the next. Kevin returned within minutes of the family's departure, immediately beginning to help me restore the house to its lived-in configuration. His efficiency at these tasks had improved dramatically over the past 2 weeks, and he had developed an intuitive understanding of which items needed to be returned to their normal position. "They seemed really interested," Kevin observed as we worked together to rearrange the living room furniture. "The kids were already talking about which bedroom they wanted and where they'd put their toys. Linda thinks they'll make an offer tomorrow, I confirm, which means we might have a sale within the next few days." Kevin paused in his work, a throw pillow in his hands, processing the implications of this development. "How long do closings usually take?" Linda estimates 3 to 4 weeks from accepted offer to final close. "So we're looking at potentially moving out of here before Halloween." The timeline was clearly more aggressive than Kevin had been mentally prepared for, despite weeks of house showings and explicit discussions about the sale process. His face went pale as he calculated the implications for his own situation. "That's less than a month," he said quietly. "I don't know if I can get everything arranged that quickly. What if I don't get the electronics store job? What if I can't find an affordable apartment? What if this whole plan falls apart?" The panic in his voice was understandable but needed to be addressed before it paralyzed his progress. Kevin had made remarkable strides in his job search and apartment hunting, but his confidence remained fragile when confronted with specific deadlines and concrete consequences. "Kevin, you've submitted applications to almost 50 employers. The odds of none of them resulting in job offers are extremely low, and you've identified multiple apartment options that would work within your budget, especially if you find a roommate. The plan isn't falling apart, it's actually working better than we hoped." "But what if it doesn't work fast enough?" Kevin persisted. "What if I'm still unemployed when the house closes? Where am I supposed to live?" The question revealed the depth of Kevin's anxiety about his ability to achieve independence within the compressed timeline circumstances had created. His concerns were reasonable, but they were also being magnified by years of avoiding adult responsibilities and the resulting lack of confidence in his problem-solving abilities. "Kevin, we'll figure it out," I assured him. "Worst-case scenario, you could stay in a weekly motel or extended stay hotel while you continue job searching. It wouldn't be comfortable, but it would be temporary and manageable. The key is to not let fear of potential problems prevent you from taking action on current opportunity." Kevin nodded, visibly working to control his anxiety. "You're right, I just never realized how many moving parts there are to adult life. When I was living here without contributing anything, I didn't have to think about timing or budgets or backup plans. Everything just happened automatically. The admission was both insightful and heartbreaking. Kevin was recognizing that his extended dependence had protected him from developing the stress tolerance and strategic thinking that independent living required. The cushion of free housing and parental support had prevented him from learning to navigate uncertainty and manage multiple competing priorities. That's exactly why this transition is so important, I explained. Learning to handle uncertainty and manage multiple responsibilities simultaneously is a crucial adult skill. You can't develop those abilities while someone else is handling all the complex decisions for you. Our conversation was interrupted by Kevin's phone buzzing with a text message. His expression shifted from anxiety to excitement as he read the screen. "It's from the electronics store," he said, his voice rising with anticipation. "They want me to come in tomorrow afternoon for a second interview with the district manager." The store manager said, "It's mostly a formality since he's already decided to offer me the position." The news represented a major breakthrough in Kevin's transition to independence. Not only would employment provide the income necessary for apartment rental, but it would also restore his sense of purpose and professional identity. The timing, coming just as we were potentially accepting an offer on the house, felt almost providential. "Kevin, that's wonderful news," I said, genuinely thrilled by his success. "What's the next step after the second interview?" "If it goes well, I could start training next Monday," Kevin replied, his excitement barely contained. "The salary is $15.50 an hour with opportunities for advancement based on performance. And they offer health insurance after 90 days, which means I wouldn't have to stay on your plan much longer." The detail about health insurance demonstrated Kevin's growing awareness of the practical aspects of independent living. His previous indifference to such matters had been possible only because I had been handling all the administrative and financial complexities of his existence. Now he was beginning to understand the interconnected nature of employment, housing, healthcare, and financial planning. "Have you calculated what your monthly income would be at that salary?" I asked, wanting to ensure he had realistic expectations about his budget. "About $2,600 before taxes, so probably around $2,000 take-home," Kevin replied promptly. "Which means I could afford up to $1,200 for rent if I'm careful about other expenses. Or maybe $800 if I find a roommate, which would give me more flexibility for savings and emergencies." The sophistication of his financial planning impressed me. Kevin had clearly been doing serious research about budgeting and cost of living calculation. His previous casual attitude toward money had been replaced by careful consideration of income, expenses, and long-term financial security. "That sounds like a solid plan," I agreed. "Have you thought about what you'll need for move-in costs?" Most apartments require first month's rent, last month's rent, and a security deposit. Kevin's expression grew more serious. "That's been my biggest concern. Even for an $800 apartment with a roommate, I'd need at least $2,400 just to move in, plus furniture, kitchen supplies, cleaning deposits, utility connections. Probably another $1,000 for basic setup costs." The financial reality of establishing independent housing was daunting, but Kevin's awareness of these costs demonstrated mature planning rather than naive optimism. His calculations were realistic and comprehensive, suggesting he had been researching apartment rental requirements rather than simply hoping everything would work out. "I've been thinking about that," I said carefully. "While I can't continue supporting you indefinitely, I would be willing to help with move-in costs as a one-time investment in your independence. Consider it a graduation gift for finally taking responsibility for your own life." Kevin's face lit up with relief and gratitude. "Really, Mom? That would make such a huge difference. I was worried I'd have to delay moving out until I could save enough money, but with your help I could be in my own place within a few weeks of starting work." The offer represented a calculated risk on my part. I wanted to support Kevin's transition to independence without enabling continued dependence. A one-time contribution toward move-in costs would remove a significant barrier to his progress, while maintaining clear boundaries about ongoing financial support. The key word is one-time, I emphasized. This would be help getting started, not ongoing assistance. Once you're in your own place, You'll need to handle all expenses independently. No borrowing money for emergencies, no asking me to cover shortfalls, no falling back on parental support when things get difficult. I understand completely, Kevin assured me. I don't want to be dependent on you anymore. It's been unfair to both of us, and I can see how much stress it's been causing you. I want to prove that I can handle adult responsibilities without constantly needing rescue. The sincerity in his voice was convincing, though I remained cautious about his ability to maintain this motivation once the immediate crisis had passed. Kevin's previous promises of change had been followed by gradual regression to comfortable patterns of dependence. This time felt different due to the external pressures and concrete deadlines, but sustainable change would require consistent effort over months and years. I'm proud of the progress you've made, I told him honestly. 2 weeks ago, you were sleeping until noon and complaining about the unfairness of your situation. Now you're actively interviewing for jobs and researching apartments. That's a remarkable transformation in a very short time. Kevin smiled, but his expression remained serious. I had to change, Mom. Losing Ashley, losing this house, potentially losing our relationship. It made me realize how much I'd been taking for granted. I never understood how much work went into maintaining the life I was enjoying for free. The acknowledgement represented genuine growth in Kevin's understanding of adult responsibilities and relationship dynamics. His previous focus on his own comfort and preferences had expanded to include consideration for others' needs and contribution. This shift in perspective was perhaps more important than any specific job or apartment he might secure. Change is always possible, I reminded him. The question is whether someone is motivated enough to do the work required. Fear of losing what matters most to you can be a powerful motivator, but lasting change requires developing internal motivation that doesn't depend on external pressure. Kevin nodded, thoughtfully. I'm hoping that once I start working and living independently, I'll develop confidence in my ability to handle problems without relying on other people. Right now, I'm still scared about whether I can really do this, but I'm more scared of what happens if I don't try. The conversation was interrupted by a call from Linda Rodriguez with updates about the house sale. The family who had viewed the property that evening had indeed submitted an offer, and it was for the full asking price with minimal contingency. 2 other potential buyers had also indicated interest in making offers, creating the competitive situation Linda had predicted. I recommend accepting the first offer, Linda advised. It's clean, well-financed, and comes from buyers who are pre-approved for significantly more than our asking price. We could probably get a slightly higher offer from someone else, but this one has the best chance of closing quickly and smoothly. The decision felt monumental despite being exactly what I had been hoping for. Accepting the offer would trigger a series of events that would permanently alter both Kevin's life and mine. There would be no possibility of changing course once the legal process began moving toward closing. Accept it, I told Linda without hesitation. We're ready to move forward. After ending the call, I turned to find Kevin watching me with a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The theoretical possibility of selling the house had just become a concrete reality with specific deadlines and legal obligations. So it's really happening, Kevin said quietly. We're really selling the house. We're really selling the house, I confirmed. The closing is scheduled for 3 weeks from today, which means we both have a lot of work to do between now and then. Kevin took a deep breath, visibly steeling himself for the challenges ahead. I guess there's no backing out now, for either of us. No backing out, I agree. But also no regrets. We're both about to start new chapters in our lives, and I think we're both ready for the change. As Kevin headed to his room to prepare for the next day's interview, I felt a profound sense of accomplishment. The rotting away comment that had sparked this entire sequence of events had seemed like pure cruelty at the time, but it had actually been the catalyst for positive changes that neither of us would have pursued under more comfortable circumstances. Sometimes the most painful moments in our lives are also the most transformative, forcing us to confront realities we've been avoiding and make changes we never would have considered otherwise. Kevin's cruel words had inadvertently given me the motivation I needed to pursue my own dreams, while simultaneously providing him with the consequences necessary to develop genuine independence. The next 3 weeks would test both our resolve and our newly developed skills, but for the first time in years I felt optimistic about the future we were creating for ourselves. The house sale represented more than just a real estate transaction. It was a symbol of our mutual commitment to growth, independence, and the kind of healthy relationship that had been impossible, while Kevin remained dependent on my enabling support. The young man who had dismissed me as rotting away was about to discover what it meant to build a life through his own effort and determination. And the mother who had been trapped in a cycle of unhealthy enabling was about to pursue the coastal retirement she had always dreamed of sharing with Tom. Both of us were finally ready to stop rotting away and start truly living. 3 weeks later, I stood in the driveway of what had been our family home for 15 years, watching the moving truck pull away from the curb. The October morning was crisp and bright, the kind of weather that made new beginnings feel possible. Inside my car were the keys to a beautiful 2-bedroom condominium in Huntington Beach, just 3 blocks from the ocean that Tom and I had always dreamed of living near. Kevin emerged from the house carrying the last of his belongings, a single suitcase and a box of personal items that represented everything he was taking to his new apartment. His face showed exhaustion from the physical demands of moving day, but underneath the fatigue was something I hadn't seen in years: genuine pride in his accomplishments. "That's everything," he announced, setting the box in the back seat of his Honda Civic. "The new owners said they'll take good care of Dad's rose bushes." The mention of Tom's garden brought a bittersweet smile to my face. The roses he had planted and tended so carefully would continue blooming for someone else's enjoyment, which felt like the right kind of legacy. Tom had always believed that beautiful things should be shared, not hoarded. "I think he would like that," I replied, pulling Kevin into a hug that felt different from any we had shared in recent years. This embrace was between equals, between 2 adults who had worked through their problems and found mutual respect on the other side. Kevin's transformation over the past 3 weeks had been remarkable. The second interview at the electronics store had gone perfectly, and he had been working full-time for 2 weeks already. His enthusiasm for the job surprised even him. He genuinely enjoyed helping customers solve technical problems and had quickly earned praise from his supervisors for his work ethic and product knowledge. The apartment situation had resolved itself with unexpected elegance. Ashley's coworker Marcus had been searching for a roommate at the same time Kevin was apartment hunting, and their shared 2-bedroom unit in a complex near downtown Riverside gave both young men privacy while keeping housing costs manageable. Kevin's portion of the rent was only $700 monthly, leaving him with enough income for savings and emergencies. "Are you nervous about living on your own?" I asked as we performed the final walkthrough of the empty house together. Kevin considered the question serious. "A little, but it's a good kind of nervous. Like the feeling you get before trying something challenging that you know you can handle. I'm excited to prove to myself that I can really do this." His response demonstrated a maturity that would have been impossible just months earlier. The Kevin who had dismissed me as rotting away would never have acknowledged nervousness as potentially positive or viewed challenges as opportunities for growth. This version of my son understood that discomfort was often the price of meaningful progress. "I'm proud of you," I told him honestly, "not just for finding a job and an apartment, but for doing the hard work of becoming someone you can be proud of. That takes real courage." Kevin's eyes filled with tears. He quickly blinked away. "I'm sorry it took so long, Mom, and I'm sorry I said those horrible things to you. You didn't deserve that treatment, especially not from someone whose entire life you were making possible." The apology was long overdue but deeply appreciated. Kevin's acknowledgement that his cruel words had been particularly inappropriate given my generosity showed genuine understanding of how relationships should work. He was finally grasping the concept that kindness deserves kindness in return, not contempt. "We both learned important lessons," I replied. "Sometimes it takes difficult circumstances to help us grow into who we're meant to be." As we locked the front door for the final time, I felt a profound sense of completion. The house that had sheltered our family through so many seasons was ready for new occupants who would create their own memories within its walls. Kevin and I were both ready for the independence we had avoided for too long. "Will you come visit my apartment once I get settled?" Kevin asked as we prepared to drive away in separate directions. "I'd love to," I assured him, and you're always welcome to visit me at the beach. I'm planning to learn how to surf if you can believe that." Kevin laughed, a sound of genuine delight that reminded me of the sweet boy he had been before entitlement and dependence had clouded his character. "Surfing at 62? That's amazing, Mom. Dad would have gotten such a kick out of that." The mention of Tom felt natural and healing rather than painful. We were both finally pursuing the kinds of adventures and growth that he had always encouraged in the people he loved. His absence still hurt, but it no longer felt like a reason to stop living full. 6 months later, I received a text from Kevin that made me smile as I sipped my morning coffee on my ocean view balcony. The message included a photo of him receiving an employee recognition award at work, along with the caption, "Just got promoted to shift supervisor. Turns out I'm pretty good at this adulting thing after all." His success at work had been accompanied by growth in other areas of his life. He had begun taking community college courses in business management, using his employee discount to save money while building skills for future advancement. His relationship with Ashley had deepened into something mature and stable, built on mutual respect rather than financial dependence. Most importantly, Kevin had discovered that independence felt better than comfort. The pride he derived from paying his own bills and solving his own problems had replaced the hollow satisfaction of avoiding responsibilities. He was building a life rather than simply inhabiting one. As for me, the oceanside retirement that Tom and I had dreamed of turned out to be everything we had imagined and more. The smaller living space required less maintenance, leaving more time for the hobbies and social activities I had neglected during my years of enabling Kevin's dependence. I had joined a book club, started painting classes, and yes, even taken a few surfing lessons that resulted in more laughter than actual wave riding. The cruel comment about rotting away that had sparked this entire transformation now seemed like an accidental gift. Kevin's words had been intended to hurt, but they had actually illuminated a truth I needed to confront. I had been stagnating, trapped in patterns of behavior that served no one's real interest. By forcing us both to face uncomfortable realities, the house sale had created opportunities for growth that neither of us would have pursued under more comfortable circumstances. Kevin learned that he was capable of far more than he had ever imagined, while I discovered that letting go of control could lead to outcomes better than anything I could have planned. The young man who had accused me of rotting away had needed to learn that real love sometimes requires difficult choices. The mother who had enabled his dependence had needed to learn that helping someone grow might temporarily hurt them but ultimately serves their best interest. Looking back, I realized that we had both been rotting away in our own ways, Kevin through avoidance of responsibility, and me through acceptance of an unhealthy dynamic that prevented both of us from reaching our potential. The house sale had been the catalyst that forced us to stop decaying and start truly living. Sometimes the most transformative moments in our lives come disguised as disasters. Kevin's cruelty had felt like the end of something important, but it had actually been the beginning of something better. We had both learned that growth requires the courage to leave comfortable situations behind and trust that we're capable of creating something new. The house may have been sold, but the family that had lived within its walls had been renewed and strengthened. And that I realized as I watched the sunrise paint the ocean, in shades of gold and pink, was worth celebrating every single day. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.